The Today Show studio buzzed with energy that morning, cameras gliding smoothly across the glossy floor, producers whispering in headsets, and audience members eagerly clutching their coffee cups. Savannah Guthrie, poised and smiling as always, sat at her anchor desk preparing for the day's big guest, Faith Hill. The country music icon had just released a new album after a long hiatus, and fans were eager to hear from her. But no one could have predicted how the next 15 minutes would unfold. Faith entered the studio in a soft cream suit, her blonde hair framing her face perfectly. She waved to the crowd with that familiar warmth that made her both glamorous and grounded. Yet behind that poised smile was a trace of unease. Those close to her knew she wasn't thrilled about the press tour. There had been chatter in the tabloids about creative disagreements with her husband, Tim McGraw, and she dreaded yet another round of questions implying her career depended on him. Savannah greeted her with enthusiasm. "Faith Hill, it's so good to have you back on the show. The new album is already topping charts. Tell us how it feels to be back in the spotlight after all these years." Faith's smile brightened. "It feels incredible, Savannah. This album came from a place of renewal for me. I took some time to reconnect, with music, with my family, with myself. Every song is a reflection of that journey." The audience applauded, sensing the sincerity in her voice. But Savannah, a journalist who never shied away from tough topics, was already shifting gears. "That's wonderful. But, Faith, there's been a lot of buzz about creative tensions during the album's recording, especially between you and Tim. Some sources say things got a bit heated. Any truth to that?" The question hung in the air like static. Faith's polite smile faltered for half a second before she steadied it. "Well," she said carefully, "anytime two passionate artists work together, there are going to be moments of strong opinions. But that's part of the creative process. We respect each other's ideas." Savannah nodded but pressed on, sensing the moment. "So, disagreements did happen." Faith exhaled softly. "Creative conversations happened, yes. But the word, tension, makes it sound like a tabloid headline." The crowd tittered, half amused, half uncomfortable. Faith's tone wasn't angry, but there was a firmness to it, a line she was drawing. Still, Savannah persisted, "I think people are just curious because this album sounds very different from your earlier collaborations. Some critics have even said it feels like you're stepping away from being Tim McGraw's wife and asserting yourself as your own brand again. Would you say that's true?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Faith blinked slowly, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Savannah," she said, her voice lower now, controlled but edged with steel, "I've been in this industry for over 3 decades. I love my husband deeply, but I've also built my career long before we ever sang a duet together. I don't think anyone ever asks a male artist if he's trying to separate himself from his wife." The audience let out a collective, "Ooh." Savannah's expression stiffened. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way." Faith leaned in slightly. "I think you did, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? When women work alongside men, especially their husbands, their success gets questioned, their independence becomes a headline. I've spent my life proving that my voice, my songs, my choices stand on their own." Savannah tried to steer back, her smile tightening. "Of course, I respect that. Let's talk about the tour." Faith shook her head, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the frustration she'd been swallowing for months. "No, Savannah, let's not pretend this is just a misunderstanding. You wanted a sound bite, not a story. And I think you've gotten what you came for." For a few tense seconds, no one moved. The audience sat frozen, eyes darting between the two women. The producers in the control room whispered urgently into headsets, unsure whether to cut to commercial. Faith slowly stood up, removing her microphone with steady hands. "I've done a lot of interviews, Savannah, but this isn't one of them," she said with quiet finality. "I came here to talk about music, not to defend my marriage or my worth." Then, with a polite nod to the audience, she turned and walked off the set. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor echoed through the stunned silence. Savannah sat frozen, eyes wide for a beat too long before forcing a smile back onto her face. We'll be right back after a short break," she managed, her voice trembling just slightly. The studio lights dimmed, the screen cut to commercial, and whispers erupted among the crew. Within minutes, clips of the walk-off hit social media. One fan tweeted, "Faith Hill just did what every woman who's tired of being undermined dreams of doing." Another wrote, "Savannah pushed too far, Faith handled it with grace and fire." By noon, Faith's name was trending across the internet. What had started as a simple morning interview had turned into one of the most talked about TV moments of the year, a spark that lit a much bigger conversation about women, respect, and the double standards still lurking beneath the spotlight. By the time the afternoon sun dipped behind the Manhattan skyline, the Faith Hill Savannah Guthrie interview had exploded into a full-blown media frenzy. Every entertainment outlet, gossip blog, and news network had replayed the clip of Faith walking off the Today Show, again and again, each time with more dramatic headlines. Some called it Faith Hill's feminist stand. Others labeled it a public meltdown. But for millions of fans, it was a moment of truth, raw and unfiltered, from a woman who had spent decades handling everything with quiet grace. Faith had spent the rest of that day flying back to Nashville, her phone vibrating nonstop with calls and notifications. Her manager had tried to calm the chaos, but the story was already out of control. Paparazzi were stationed at the airport, reporters yelling questions as Faith made her way through the terminal, dark sunglasses shielding her tired eyes. She didn't say a word, just kept walking, clutching her tote bag and keeping her composure. When she reached home, her husband, Tim McGraw, was waiting for her in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, a faint smirk on his face. "Well," he said softly, "you sure lit a fire today." Faith sighed, setting her bag down. "I didn't plan to, Tim. She paused, rubbing her temples. "I got tired of the same narrative. I'm proud of what we've built together, but every time I do something on my own, they still make it about you. It's exhausting." Tim walked over, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did what you had to do," he said gently. "You didn't lose your temper, you stood your ground. There's a difference." Faith smiled faintly. "Tell that to the headlines." Over the next few days, the world couldn't stop talking about it. Fans rallied behind Faith, flooding social media with messages of support. The hashtag Faith Hill Speaks Up began trending globally. Commentators on talk shows debated what had happened. Was Savannah out of line, or was Faith overly sensitive? It didn't matter. What mattered was that people were talking about something bigger than an awkward TV moment. They were talking about respect for women in the entertainment industry. Back in New York, Savannah Guthrie was facing her own storm. The Today Show offices were flooded with emails, some defending her, others demanding an apology. By the second day, Savannah addressed it live on air. Her tone was composed, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. "Yesterday's interview with Faith Hill took a turn I didn't anticipate," she said. "I respect Faith tremendously. My intention was never to undermine her accomplishments. I asked a question as a journalist, but I recognize how it came across. I'm truly sorry if it hurt or disrespected her." The apology made headlines too, though opinions remained divided. Some praised Savannah's professionalism, others called it damage control. But Faith stayed quiet, for now. That evening, she sat out on her porch, watching the Tennessee sky turn purple and gold. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't from a publicist or a journalist. It was a text from Reba McEntire. "You said what needed to be said, sister. Proud of you." Then another from Shania Twain. "Every woman in country music is clapping right now." Faith smiled for the first time in days. Maybe, she thought, this moment wasn't a scandal, it was a spark. 2 days later, Faith posted a photo on Instagram, her sitting barefoot on a hillside near her ranch, hair loose, guitar by her side. The caption read, "Passion can be mistaken for anger. But sometimes, passion is just the truth demanding to be heard. I've always believed in standing tall, even when it's uncomfortable. Yesterday reminded me why." The post went viral instantly. Within hours, it had over 1 million likes and thousands of comments, fans, fellow artists, and women from all walks of life thanking her for saying what they had always felt. Major outlets reframed their coverage, shifting from controversy to empowerment. That same week, her album sales skyrocketed. Radio stations replayed her latest single, "Stand Still and Sing," which many began interpreting as her anthem of resilience. Faith hadn't planned it that way, but the timing felt poetic. A month later, Faith returned to live television, but on her own terms. She appeared on CBS Mornings, where host Gayle King opened the conversation with warmth and respect. "Faith," Gayle said with a smile, "you've had quite the few weeks. How are you feeling now that the dust has settled?" Faith chuckled softly. "I feel lighter," she said. "Sometimes you don't realize how heavy silence is until you finally stop carrying it. That moment on Today, I didn't storm off in anger. I walked away to remind people that I'm not here to play along with outdated stories. Gail nodded. Do you regret it? Not for a second, Faith replied. If my daughters, or any young woman watching, saw that and thought, I don't have to let anyone define me, then it was worth it. The studio erupted in applause. That moment cemented her not just as a beloved singer, but as a voice of integrity in an industry too often driven by image and gossip. Weeks later, Savannah Guthrie was asked about it again during a media panel. She smiled, a little ruefully. Faith taught me something that day, she said. There's a fine line between asking a hard question and questioning someone's worth. I crossed that line, and I'm grateful she showed me where it was. In the end, what began as a tense morning show exchange became a cultural flashpoint. Faith Hill hadn't just defended herself, she'd reignited a national conversation about respect, independence, and the right to speak one's truth. She hadn't simply stormed off a set, she'd walked into history, proving once again that grace and conviction can echo louder than any headline.